Okay, so the topic that we'd like to talk to you about today is something that not only benefits us as physical therapists, but as people and as species in general. It's something that has contributed to the great success of our species, but also lack thereof is also commonly the root of a lot of the problems that we face today. So before we identify exactly what this trait is, let's think about what animals come to mind when we think of a strong species. Right, so to my mind, I think of bears, tigers, lions, sharks, like wolves, cheetahs, what have you. And if we think about these, like basically the animals that you wouldn't want to go round for round with. Like, I mean, even the shark, if you had home field advantage with the shark, it's still flopping around, like it's gonna be hard to kill. The thing is, these animals have been around for millions of years, not just 1, 2, 3, millions of years. And if you know how long humans are, you know what I'm gonna say next, how long we've been around for. If you don't, go ahead and think about it for a second. The answer is about 200,000 years comparatively to those millions of years. So what that means is that we are the new kids on the block. And we don't have those sharp teeth, retractable claws, speed and sheer strength that some of these other animals have. So, and yet we are successful. Would you agree? We are successful and we are a strong species. So what's going on here? What are our adaptive traits? What makes us strong? What are our advantageous characteristics? So when I think of things, I think of our brain, right? So we have two major categories, intellect and emotions. Intellect being our knowledge, information, use of tools maybe, problem-solving logic. Okay, that's all fair and nice, but how about the emotion part? Our social bonds, our teamwork, our compassion, which is what this whole thing is about, but collaboration, communication, trust, love, but mainly compassion. That's what we're talking about here. So, Brandon will define this in a few moments, a little more in depth, but let's just leave it at compassion is not only the empathetic response, like I feel you, man, it's also the act, the taking action, doing something about it. So what we're looking at here is an artist's portrayal of a very historical event. It's actually the origin of the first bear hug. No, but actually what we see in this picture is that our strongest trait is each other. My teeth with Brendan, my claws are me and Aunt Allie. Like, we work together, we care for each other. It's that innate instinct. We don't have the sharp teeth, like I'm saying. We have each other. And when we show or receive compassion, it reminds us of that strength. It reminds us that we are not alone. And so, what is the biological basis of compassion? Can we see it? Can we measure it? Well, we know that the empathetic response, like the empathy component, so half of the equation, is definitely directly observable when we look at brains. Just the simple act of seeing someone suffering, right, or in distress, if we put their brain under whatever machines we use to see brain activity, we see that the same parts of the brain activate as if you were yourself in pain. So that is a very real, that human connection, these mirror neuron studies show us that empathy is a real thing. And we see the action part, the altruism, every time a firefighter runs into a burning building, or when we're on the couch and we're like on our edge with our hair, like, I don't have hair, but pulling out your hair because you're just saying, don't go in that door, you know what I mean? Like trying to protect that character that you don't even know, that actually is even fake. We are compassionate beings is what I'm trying to say, it's very innate. In addition, the last thing here before Brendan takes it over, is that when we show compassion, not only is it good for the receiver, it's the deliverer. We know that with these brain activity studies that the same reward centers, pleasure centers, are activated when we give compassion as if we were getting our own personal gratification. So not only does it imply that compassion promotes our physiological and social well-being, it really means the benefit is a two-way street.
So as Brian said, compassion is in our human nature. It's in our DNA to want to help people and be compassionate towards others and care for them. The ATPA recognizes compassion as one of the core values that a physical therapist should have. I believe this is why many of us chose the field of physical therapy and profession. It's because we want to help other people and care for them. So we decided to make a Wordle we surveyed 50 people from ages 12 all the way up to 96, just about what they thought of when they heard the word compassion. So as you can see, mainly you see understanding and caring. You can also see all these other words that come into it. So not one person thought of one thing. So you see also love, concern, sympathy, respect, attention. So you see that compassion has this profound meaning and it's so deep to our patients and people we're treating, as well as just everyone in everyday life. So it's just important for us to be, as therapists, to just go the extra step, be compassionate towards our patients. When they first come into the clinic, greet them. Even when you're treating them, try hands-on, be with them, work with them. Because it really builds a relationship and they really respect that. And as you see it in all these words that comes to mind when we show extra compassion towards them.
So we looked to the research to validate just how important compassion was for our patients. I mean, we found kind of the same thing with everybody. Compassion was really important. But one study stood out to us in particular. and looked at patients with chronic low back pain, and they divided them into 4 groups. So the first group had E-stim and no therapeutic alliance. The second group had no E-stim and no therapeutic alliance. The third group had E-stim and a therapeutic alliance. And the fourth group had no E-stim but had a therapeutic alliance. And the researchers defined a therapeutic alliance as having a bond between the therapist and the patient. So the therapist would do things such as look in the patient's eyes. They would reiterate what the patient had said just so the patient knew that they were actively listening. They would initiate physical contact with the patient and say things like, oh, I can imagine how hard this must be for you. Like, I understand what you're going through. And obviously, like, not surprising, they found that E-stim and the therapeutic alliance had the greatest effects, which is the third bar. But what they also found, which was kind of surprising to us, was that the last bar, which was the no E-stim and a therapeutic alliance, did better than actually getting the E-stim with no therapeutic alliance. So it kind of proves and hammers home that if you have a therapeutic alliance and show compassion to your patients, it might be better than any treatment that you might be giving them.
So to make this a little more practical for us, a few tips to enhance your compassion. Listening non-judgmentally and acceptingly can offer a sense of emotional release for your patients, which will allow them to open up and trust you sooner, and they'll divulge more information to you. And there's a saying, I'm not sure if it's a statistic, but 90% of diagnoses can be accurately made just from taking a good history, and that's all on listening, and that's interpreting what your patient's saying based on their tone, their speed of answering, as well as their facial expressions and their body language. And being receptive to that and not having a judgmental face when they do have a weird reaction is crucial for developing that bond, proving that they can trust you no matter what they say. A good method to get in the habit of listening better is to invite, to listen, and to summarize so that you validate their concerns. Janina mentioned a couple other aspects to go along with that. But validating and summarizing are crucial because that has actually shown in one of the studies we found to promote further inquiry, empathy, and engagement. So you can get even more out of your patient, not just necessarily pertaining to the injury, but more about like other social aspects that could be holding them back, other psychological things going on. Other steps that we talked about just when they walk in the clinic, just say, hey, how's it going today? How you doing? Interact with them while you're treating them. Don't just put them off in the corner by themselves. That's so easy to do. Literally reach out to your patient, just like Janina said, initiate that physical contact because that stimulates not only the somatosensory cortex, but also the limbic system and creates a feeling of acceptance and comfort and makes them feel like they belong. Most importantly, we talk a lot about this, but it's not as complicated as it sounds. Just be mindful of the patient that you're treating. When you're treating a patient, that's what you're doing. You're not worried about the email you might be getting from your other boss. You're not worried about the notes that you haven't done yet. You're not thinking about how hungry you are because you missed lunch because you had to keep treating. You're treating this patient, and they are your goal. And taking all those compassionate actions and your successful treatment, that is how they will get better.
All right, guys, so this isn't groundbreaking news, We all know, we're told every day, be compassionate, show compassion. We all know it's important, but there really are moments in life, and in the clinic especially, when when this becomes very crystal clear that this is one of our strongest traits, to be compassionate. So I had a patient over at past clinical who really reminded me of this notion. For the sake of the story, let's say her name was Hippa. Hippa is a 60-year-old woman suffering from a lot of the conditions in metabolic syndrome, diabetes, obesity. She actually had multiple fractures. This will take too long because we're almost out of time here, but she had a radial fracture that was just sticking out like this. It was closed, but they couldn't do anything because she was a poor candidate for surgery. Anyway, so we would work things on like standing tolerance and monitoring her O2, so deep breathing. And so in addition to guiding her through these exercises, I would also tell her why. Take her through the breathing process, the basic physiology behind it. And so anyway, one day she calls me over, tears in her eyes, I think something's wrong. I'm like, oh no, so what's going on, Hippa? And she thanks me. She's like, I just appreciate so much that you take the time to, sometimes I would not even say anything, I would just sit next to her, just to be a presence with her, just to take the time to tell me the why behind the what. She said that throughout the years she's seen so many doctors, pulmonologists, respiratory therapists, and she said none of them took her and sat her down and took her through the breathing process. The why, not the what. So this was something so small in my eyes. I didn't think much of it, like talking to her through, like educating, patient education, but this was so large in her eyes. Like, you know, this isn't the best or most grand example of compassion, but I think it holds testament to that even the smallest acts, conscious or not, of compassion really do make a huge impact on patients' lives, experiences, and as Janina said, outcomes. So there is a quote that the Greek philosopher Plato has, and it goes something like this. The human mind or soul is like a chariot, the intellect being the driver, you know, and the emotions being the horses. You know, that's what really drives us. It's the combination that makes us strong. So, you know, we can be the most intelligent physical therapists out there. We can recite clinical practice guidelines all day. We even might know what a likelihood ratio is. But without that emotional component, that compassionate therapeutic alliance, you know, we're only giving our patients half of what they need and deserve. Thank you.